Well, welcome. I'm Kara. Thanks for joining us today for this CSA Bootcamp and this long run of fall 2024 workshops about running CSAs. So today we're going to be talking about communication channels and strategies for communicating with members. To go through the agenda a little bit, today we'll be talking about, we'll do some introductory stuff about GrownBy. And then we'll talk about the why of communicating. We'll talk a little bit about storytelling. We'll spend some time on methods of communication, like different ways you can be managing communication with your members. My very favorite part of this in prepping for this is talking about the topics you can communicate. Like, what are the things you want to be using to sort of tell the story of your farm and communicate with members? And then we'll have time for discussion at the end. Farm Generations is a multi-stakeholder agricultural cooperative. We are built by farmers, owned by farmers, started by farmers. We also have employees who can be stakeholders or members in the co-op. Our first product, our only product of the Farm Generations Cooperative is GrownBy, which is a sales software for CSA shares and wholesale farm sales and any kind of direct marketing with from farms and food producers to customers. This project is coming out of a partnership with GrownBy and Just Food that was funded by the USDA's Farmers Market Promotion Program last year. There are a number of things that came out of that grant that are CSA specific, including a handbook. A lot of the stuff we'll cover today is kind of from that handbook, but in a little bit more detail. There's also a survey report about CSA in New York City and some identifying and understanding that model and some needs from that model. And there also are 2 recorded workshops, one in English and one in Spanish, about CSA best practices in New York City specifically, which has an unusual and really cool model. So today we're going to be talking about communication. So in thinking about communicating with your members, one useful way to think about it is to just step back and be like, what are our goals? Why would we worry at all about being a good communicator? Mostly we all want to be great communicators in all aspects of our life, right? You want to be a good communicator with your spouse or your kids or your family or your coworkers or in all kinds of ways. But with your members, there are some added goals potentially. So you want to be building communication and connection between you and your customers. And I say between, right? Because I think that the community part of CSA can really go both ways. You don't just want, you don't just feel like, oh, we want our members to feel connected to us because you want them to buy shares. Although you do want them to buy your shares, but also because your farm is important to you. You want people to understand it, and growing for specific customers, for actual families, may be really rewarding to you. And so that back and forth connection is really helpful. You also want to sell shares, and you want to sell them potentially really easily, really smoothly, really quickly, with profit for the farm. So that is a goal of clear and easy and effective communication. And the third goal, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is a part that kind of comes up in this communication piece, is just the ease of being a CSA member. So probably you want it to be easy and fun for people to be CSA members. They wanted to join, they wanted to pay you money to join your farm. So you want to help them enjoy their share, use their share, make it super easy, know where to park, know when their share is going to be, not miss things, not forget, all the things that will make it easy for them. Additionally, you want to make it easy for them because that makes it easier for you, right? Not to have your customers parking on your lay flat and forgetting their bags and needing extra things and asking lots of questions. You want to really be able to make that easy for them, easy for you, really fun for everybody. So one of the pieces that this slide is probably directly from last week, but that I think is really important in creating that connection is storytelling, right? So your members are not just joining your farm and becoming members of your CSA for produce. They are, like, that's exciting. And if they didn't get produce, they probably wouldn't rejoin, but they're really joining for the connection. And so it's important that you help foster that connection, help them maybe articulate or help, articulate in various ways the core values of your farm. And those values, you might have many core values of your farm, right? But they might be really broad. There might be a lot of them, right? You might be thinking about land stewardship, or you might be thinking about land preservation. You might be talking or thinking about um, engaging and educating a new generation of farmers. You might be thinking about continuing a family farm that's been in your family for many generations. You might be thinking about organic or resiliency, um, or all kinds of stuff, right? There's all kinds of core values. And so it's helpful to maybe be really clear about those a little bit with yourself and other members and owners of your farm early on in this process, to be like, what are some of the stories we are trying to tell? What are these values that we want to get across? Part of good storytelling is good photos, because, whatever the adage is, like a picture's worth 1,000 words. I think that's how it goes. So those pictures can be really great photos of you, the farm, the wildlife, the domestic animals, your members, the way pickup works, your employees, equipment, farms, all kinds of stuff. Photos can really help communicate that stuff. It can communicate those core values at certain times with certain photos. And then there's also a food story to shares. We do hear that one of the main reasons that customers join CSAs is for the produce, that they are really excited about cooking. And so you can help make that part of your story and communicate and facilitate great recipes for your customers. So methods. We're going to go over a lot of these in more detail, right? But some primary channels where you communicate are your newsletters or your email marketing. You communicate via social media. You might have other, you also probably have your own website. You might have a GrownBy shop. Those are some main places where you're communicating with your customers. There's also other places that you may or may not be. So you might have private online groups. You might host virtual gatherings. There are some really interesting and more unusual options, like our farm has a zine. There are farms that have ebooks with recipes or storage guides. You most likely have some level of in-person communication, like signs or posters or someone at distribution chatting with members. If that's you, then you're probably already pretty well linked to understanding those kind of core values of your farm. But if that person overseeing your distribution and interfacing with members directly is an employee, it might be helpful to just say, here are some things to chat about if someone wants to talk to you at distribution. You may also have in-person events like parties, potlucks, work days, meet the farmer events. And those are also really important moments, super important moments to help tell the story of your farm, to create that connection that is going to keep members kind of coming back and interested and knowledgeable, and also is going to fill the need that they have to be directly connected to a farm. So one of the things that comes up a little bit in the work that I do around CSA is this idea of a contract or a member agreement. So 10 years ago, I would have said, okay, all CSA farms have these member agreements. I think we're seeing that less and less these days. But we are seeing sometimes handbooks or FAQs. So sometimes that's its own PDF. I note here, Blooming Glen has this awesome member guide, which might be a template from somewhere, but that covers all kinds of information. If you are interested in having more of a contract that sets up expectations, rules, guidance, that kind of thing, that is signed by your members, you can certainly do that. I would also say if you are hoping for that to be some level of a legal document, Farm Commons, which is a really cool farm-specific legal resource, might be a good reference point. They have a couple of guides to member agreements. If you're like down to take a real deep dive into that. But generally, I would say one of the best and most important parts of a member handbook or even an FAQ is to just be really clear about your expectations. CSAs have traditionally been a little bit of an unusual buying system or buying method. And so if you have customers who are new to CSA or have not been a member of yours, or if yours has different rules, you just want to be really clear about that from the beginning. Even if it's not entirely legally binding, it can be a helpful way of just heading off potential problems. This member handbook or FAQ on your website, or however you want to approach like sharing this information, can also be a really useful how-to guide for things that might come up for your customers frequently, like how to claim vacation weeks, any tips about using your online sales software. So we want GrownBy to be like the easiest, smoothest experience for customers, but every farm does things a little bit differently. And so if there are things you need to communicate with your customers, I think a member handbook is a great place to do that. Any details about the actual pickup, so where to park, what to bring or not to bring, like how to unload or move totes around if that's something customers are doing, any information you need to communicate about your payment plans, about farm contact. And then sometimes these member handbooks have lots of storage suggestions for crops, prep, or like uh, preservation tips for using a share, especially for some folks who are maybe a little bit newer to CSA. Using a share can be a little bit overwhelming. And so as much as you can communicate to folks ahead of time, they might have a better, smoother experience. So that kind of member handbook, whether you're seeing that as sort of a contractual thing, or whether you're seeing it as just a way, a method of communicating clearly some one-time information with your customers, I think that can be a great resource. And we are increasingly seeing this. And I've seen some really cool examples just sort of searching around about member handbooks. And then newsletters. So newsletters are going to be one of the most common methods of communicating with shareholders, with customers. You may have a weekly newsletter. We'll talk about that in a second. Probably if you have a weekly share, you should have a weekly newsletter. And because it's this task that you're now doing like every week, sending it out, maybe sending to all kinds of customers, email software is really helpful. Here on the right, there are some options for email software. You can certainly pop into the chat and say email software that you've used if there's some that you've particularly liked. For a more complex farm, these software tools can allow segmenting, so can allow you to maybe have like a segment that's your CSA members, and maybe a segment that's other folks, either farmers market customers or or like just folks who are interested, could be potential members down the line, that kind of thing. These tools also allow you to have templates of some sort, so that they might have consistent content that's in every single newsletter that you send out. So Christina from Troy Division, who uses Flowdesk, mentioned that in the footer of all of her newsletters, she just has a line about like what happens if you don't pick up. because that member communication piece about like this is a CSA and you're joining for the risk and the bounty, and there might be some weeks that are a little light or that you might miss. She's laid that out ahead of time really clearly with her customers, but we all know that your customers might not be reading every single thing you've ever written down or communicated to them in an email or on your website. And so just having it in the footer of every one of those emails, she feels like that has further communicated to her customers the importance of being there for each pickup. Your template might also shout out an organization that receives your donations. It should probably have your contact info if that's important, any links to your social media, any links to partners. Also, if you have anything that customers are doing every week, like have the ability to claim a vacation week, that would be something you could include as part of that template so that they got that information every week with links. Newsletter tools like this also allow for some level of data collection, right? They let you see, like, are people opening this? You can test different subject lines if you're interested. That's kind of higher level email marketing, but can be really important for having people open your newsletters. A newsletter tool won't necessarily won't necessarily translate your newsletter for you, but if translation is important for your members, you could likely use one of these tools to have segments that go to specific customers so that they're getting a newsletter in the language that's right for them. That's a little extra work, but is really useful if you have customers who are not English speakers and you've made that a goal of your CSA. So thinking about who receives your newsletters, we kind of touched on this a second ago. Your members are your main target audience. They're going to be they're really the folks we're thinking about today and in this sort of CSA series. But you might have other farmers market customers or other potential members. And thinking about if they receive exactly the same newsletter as your members or a slightly different one, and how your tool can help you do that. You may also think about this newsletter more broadly and think about where you might want to have links for other non-members to sign up for your newsletter. So putting a sign up for a place on your website for customers to sign up to receive a newsletter, in your social media. If you have signage, having a QR code that allows folks to sign up for your newsletter there, that kind of keeps people in this kind of communication channel and make sure that you are getting the email addresses of people who are most interested in knowing about you. Thinking a little bit about newsletter timing, or even social media timing. So, excuse me. I mentioned this earlier, but for CSA, I think that a weekly newsletter is pretty key. If you do not have a weekly share, it might not necessarily be a need. If you only send out say a meet share once a month, it could be that monthly is the appropriate timing for you. I would say that if you have biweekly shares or shares that go out every other week, it's really helpful to make sure that those customers are still getting a weekly newsletter, because there might be information that you cover or a story that you highlight that is like just a helpful thing for all members to know. So I would encourage you to make sure that all members are getting a weekly newsletter, no matter what the frequency of their share distributions are. Also, I think it's really good to send out your newsletters before the season starts. So it might be that one of the most relaxing parts of your off season is not having to write a weekly newsletter. But I think it is key to keep some level of off-season contact, whether you drop down to monthly or every once in a while, and then to ramp that up a little bit before people start receiving their shares. so that they have started thinking about you again. They're looking forward to their share. You're kind of building a little bit of momentum ahead of time. It, for some farmers, newsletters are beloved and they like writing them, right? It's like a different part of your brain that you're maybe not using most of the week. Um, but and I, I, yeah, my husband was, as a farmer, was our newsletter writer, and it brought him a lot of joy. Even then, it can be hard. And so planning ahead of time, having a rough plan for newsletters, maybe having a couple of newsletters that are mostly written can be really helpful for making sure that you get a newsletter out the door the day that you are supposed to, even if your irrigation pump has gone on the fritz and you have a lot of other things you have to do. So planning ahead can be really helpful, even if you love writing newsletters. And I think it's especially helpful if you do not love writing newsletters. Very commonly people will say like, oh, Wednesday morning is my or, whatever, X morning is my newsletter writing time, or I do this every week at this exact time, because the timing of the newsletter tends to be on the day before the day of the first of your distributions of the week. So maybe you have a Tuesday and a Thursday distribution, but you might send out your newsletter on Tuesdays. Or you might send it out, to different segments depending. So planning ahead can be really helpful. Having a calendar for social media posts is also incredibly helpful. Some of those you can plan ahead of time. Maggie, who's on this call and is our communications guru at GrownBy, says that Planoly is a helpful tool for scheduling posts, planning grids, that kind of thing. So those are some of the tools that I think are out there. One of the other methods of communication between the farm and the customers could be private groups or online communities. So those private groups, which could be like a Facebook group or a Google group, might be a closed space that's just for members, and could be an exciting way of sort of drumming up excitement. Like, this is a member perk, is that you get to be part of this private group. Members there could communicate directly with you, but also directly with each other, right? And share recipes or ask questions or storage tips or pictures. I think that can be a really nice way of fostering community between members, even online. Also, just regular social media comments can do that to some level too. You can encourage your customers to share photos and tag you in them. Just a quick note that we have talked a little bit about, like, oh, you might want to, right, like there might be like weekly communication that goes out. Also in GrownBy, there are automated reminders. There's messaging in GrownBy as well, but there are automated reminders to help people remember to pick up. And in that reminder in the email version of that reminder is information about missed pickup. So it's another option and another place where you can further communicate the rules and just what to expect as a customer picking up on a day. We also hear from farmers that some farms use texting tools. I think if you're using GrownBy, that's like maybe less necessary, because I think a lot of times those texting tools are used to remind customers about their pickup. However, texting has a much higher rate of opening than emails, and so it can be a way of having a little bit more communication. I don't know a ton about these tools. I'd be curious if anybody is using one that they want to mention in the chat. Some of the common ones we hear about are Simple Texting, Textra, and Klaviyo, which can also be a newsletter resource. So, and some of these offer two-way texting, right? So that it's not just that you get a text, that customers get a text from the farm, but that they can kind of facilitate back and forth. You might be doing this anyway, just texting with your customers, but it can be a way of like kind of keeping track a little bit more easily. The options, Ali says that they've used simple texting. That's awesome. Or uses currently, which is a better vouch for simple texting than used in the past tense. So that's great to hear. Some of these you pay by the text, and some of them you pay a subscription fee. So it's just maybe helpful to think about what you like how many texts you expect to send. Is there anything you want to share, Ali, about your experience with simple texting? All right, maybe not. We might hear from Ali more later. Okay, my very favorite, one of the things I love to talk about, and the part of this workshop that I was excited to help communicate are topics. Like, what are some of the topics that you can consider ahead of time that you want to include in your newsletters and in social media communications? I think this is great for storytelling. It's great for recipes. There's just so much stuff in here, and this is useful to have somewhere on paper, on a video somewhere, because when you sit down in front of your computer on a sunny weekday morning and are like, okay, I have to write the like 17th newsletter in a row. What am I going to say this week? It's like sometimes helpful to have some topics planned out. So a lot of this stuff is going to be email marketing or newsletter specific, but could also go over into social media communications, can also be used for social media communication. So I'll try to highlight that here or there. So news from the farm. This is you probably want to have a sentence or two of the news from the farm every single week of your share. I would say striking a balance between truthfulness and optimism is sort of key here. There might be weeks when you just have only glowing things to say, and there might be weeks where things feel a little underwater. And so finding the right balance there can be really important, but not also just sugarcoating everything about farming for your customers. This is also if there are problems that are occurring, um, helping to communicate a little bit ahead of time can really head off problems. So if you're having a drought and your irrigation, the creek you use for irrigation is running low, being clear with customers about that in the weeks prior, um, both paints a picture of what it's really like to farm and helps them understand that potentially this crop or that crop will be smaller or less abundant, um, which is maybe especially useful with CSA where they're committed to the farm. And so that abundance comes through or doesn't in their share. You just want to probably mention things that the crew is doing, right? So everyone's excited to hear when tomatoes are getting transplanted. Um, Everyone is excited to know, I don't know, about like rainstorms or first harvests or that kind of thing. I read a lot of farm newsletters, just in my role. And so, like, people communicate problems with their delivery trucks and issues with labor and the excitement about seeing a bird that they haven't seen. So it's like all kinds of really across the whole spectrum of what it's like to farm. Photos can be really useful. You should probably have photos in every newsletter or email marketing that you send out because it's probably what people want to see the most and it's easiest to see. So as you are going through the week, like keeping photos, having your team take photos if they are also doing that. So you'll probably want to have a picture of the share. We'll talk about that in a minute. Any photos from the farm, pictures of the crew at work. Everybody loves pictures of animals. Um, we talked about a little bit about that earlier. I stole this photo from Instagram, which I don't usually take photos from Instagram of farms that I'm not in communication with, but this is from Flying Coyote Farm, and I thought they just did a really nice job with this picture showing share contents. So pictures of your share are awesome. you want to probably list in every newsletter, hey, these are the things you're getting in your share this week. If you have multiple sizes of shares, you're going to want to communicate that. Like, this is what's in the small share, this is what's in the large share, so that people know. These photos that have the vegetables labeled can be a really helpful way of also communicating with customers that might not know the difference between your acorn squash and your delicata squash. That wouldn't actually be very helpful in this exact photo because they're together, but so that if a customer is getting something that they're not super familiar with, they have the words to even Google the recipe for it if you haven't provided a recipe. So labeled photos can be really helpful. This is another thing that's really great on social media. These labeled photos, might get your customers, it might get your members excited about it, but it also might be a really good marketing or communication tool for non-members. In your newsletter, you can highlight what you might expect to see in the share next week, anything that could be extra fun, like, oh, we're expecting our first new potatoes of the year next week, that kind of thing helps people might plan their meals ahead of time or plan their additional shopping that they might be doing outside of the CSA. Any links to add-on products should also go out in the newsletter. So if you have, you have items that are available a la carte or available from another farm, your newsletter is a really important place to communicate that with those potential shoppers. So that is that content. And then one of the other key topics is about recipes. Recipes are an important part of a newsletter. They can also be shared on social media too, but I think are probably most frequently going out in email newsletters or email marketing. So there should be recipes for things that are in your share. It's great when a recipe has multiple items from that share also, right? So that a customer can make something, so that a member can make something that uses a number of the items from that share. This is a task that you can prep for pre-season, right? This can be a winter task. You can also even delegate this to someone else on your staff. If you have employees and you say like, oh, this employee is really excited about cooking and really excited about recipes, this would be a great job for them to spend 90 minutes a week, like finding recipes for us. You can certainly provide links, but you do want to consider that a lot of times these days, some recipe sites have paywalls. So consider that ahead of time too. Yeah, and so I think this recipe part can be a thing that you don't have to do the week of, right? That you can keep a folder of your very favorite cauliflower recipes and just plop one into the newsletter when you're ready. Because that can be a stressful piece, right? Trying to come up with a recipe in that day of that, in the morning when you're writing your newsletter. Considering recipes that are culturally relevant is also important, especially if you have a CSA distribution that might have a really specifically different demographic, not, like that's not the same as your farm. So if you are distributing in a community that has a really high Chinese American population, that your recipes might need to be different. And that's a task to do all season. And it also might be something that you can work with your CSA members to find. Like, they might have really great resources for recipes that they know of and are excited about. Including storage tips for items in the share is also super important along with recipes. That's just so members have a share that lasts for a while, right? That they don't put their basil in the fridge and it all turns black in a day. Even if you are not packaging an item, right? We're all trying to reduce our single-use plastics. And bagging or packaging items on farm takes a lot of labor and time and expense. So you might not be wrapping or bagging certain items, but probably some of them should be wrapped in a refrigerator. And so really communicating that with your customers so that they're prepared with the tools that they need at home to make the most of their share. Items that should or shouldn't be stored together, what should be in the fridge versus on the counter or somewhere else. I think that recipes are also a really fun time to mention, to just provide a tiny bit of connection with the farm itself. So, you might not be making like fancy goat cheese zucchini galette in the like height of your season. I probably just mispronounced that word. But anyway, like a real fan, like you might include a recipe for something that you're like, if I had 10 more hours in my day, I'd be eating this. But actually what we do is throw our garlic scapes on the grill. And so I think it's really fun to just have a tiny bit of connection in the recipe section of your newsletter, your email marketing as well, to say, here's a recipe for garlic scape pesto that we've really loved in the past, but most often we just throw our garlic scapes a little oiled on the grill and then eat them with our fingers. Or to say, in our house, the kids eat all the sugar snap peas before they ever make it into a pan, but we do love this blistered sugar snap pea recipe or something. It's just one extra moment to like paint a picture of what it feels or looks like to farm. And then encouraging your members to tag the farm in any recipes or food photos that they post online, I think can be a fun way to have more recipes out there. The Hudson Valley CSA zine has this. There's I can link to this in this video and in the email that we send out afterwards. Has like lots of great storage tips and recipes and fun facts. So that is a topic that that's a resource you can use to answer the need of like covering recipes and storage tips for your customers. One of the other things that's likely to be in your newsletter or in your email communication is just logistical updates. So if there's any problems, any changes, a week you're not going to be there, if people need to have a reminder not to bring their dogs or to bring their bags or that whatever, a work party's coming up, anything like that, those are logistical things that you're going to want to put in your newsletter. You're also probably going to want to put on your social media to help remind, well, maybe not the part about the dogs or the bringing the bags, but a work party you would want to cover in your social media. And if there is a specific call to action in your newsletter, so making that might be something like place an order by a deadline or sign up for something or volunteering, making that as easy to follow, as bold, as clear as possible, knowing that in the best case scenario, your customers read through your newsletter and share it with their friends and read through it again, but maybe also they just skim it, look at the pictures and move on. And so making that call to action as clear as possible is going to, have the best result for you. And there are a couple of like more evergreen topics that I would highlight here too. These can be really useful for newsletters or for social media. And these might be topics that you can prepare off season in order to be ready to have a newsletter that goes out every week that is the least stressful as possible to you. So here are some of those, right? Like I think that profiling an employee or introducing all your employees is fun. It creates a little bit of connection. This is also an opportunity to really talk about what could be a core value of yours, right? Maybe I kind of mentioned it earlier, right? Maybe training a new generation of folks is important. Maybe the intergenerationalness of your farm is an important core value for you. And so you can talk a little bit about what it's like to work with your uncle or whomever. Maybe maybe you have a really amazing core of H2A workers and you want to highlight that program and what it feels like to work with those folks and like the value of them and the program. So those kinds of things are all parts that you can talk about when you're also just talking about your employees. In a lighter way, you can also just have them introduce themselves. So you can have each employee write, 3 sentences about them, their favorite vegetable, how they got to this farm, anything like that, that can be kind of fun. You can also profile a farm that you work with that has an add-on share. So that's a great time to talk about core values like regenerative agriculture, like animal welfare approved, the kind of things that you think are really important in working with another farm, right? Or highlight something that you love about them. And that's the kind of thing you could have ready far ahead of time to plop into a newsletter. Sharing a part of the history of your farm, the history of the land, your personal history with that land, how you came to be there, whoever stewarded the land before you, the geography or topography of that land can be an interesting story to tell. Your personal farming history is also a great and important story of the farm. I really frequently, because of the role that I have, look at farmers' websites and can see the difference in a farm that is telling a complicated story of how they came to farm, sometimes really movingly. And some farms have like almost no content and almost no pictures of the actual people doing the work. And I think that is part of what your customers are excited to be part of when they join a CSA farm. You can also profile a farming mentor. Like a lot of us have come into farming through apprentice programs. And so talking about somebody you admire and highlighting another farm and what you learned and the key things that you do that you learned from someone else can be a cool detail too. And again, something you can prep ahead of time. Explaining a specific farming practice on your farm is a really, really common one. I think that like some suggestions that I might see here are explaining the way you use electronet to move chickens, right? And like the tasks involved in that and the price involved in that maybe and why you do it and why you do it and how, right? One of my very favorite newsletters is from Jody at Roxbury Farm. And just this week, she kind of highlighted like how we use landscape fabric and why, and some of the feelings we might be having about it from an environmental perspective. Like these are the other things we've tried. This is why it keeps your food cleaner or weed free. And so just going a little bit deeper into a specific practice on your farm can be a really useful way of educating. There goes my dog. Educating your customers and helping them know a little bit more, and also just know a little bit more about the day-to-day life of what it's like to um, grow the produce or manage the farm that you are managing. And then another thing that I've seen happen or be another tool or method I've seen is to profile a specific crop that's in the share for that week. So to follow it from seed to harvest, one of the ones that I think of often is celeriac or celery root, right? Which you like start is one of the very first seeds that you start in the greenhouse in February or March. And you have these little tiny slow growing babies that you like have on your farm for months and months and months and months. And then finally in whatever, September or October, after hoeing them and irrigating them, you can finally harvest them. And then your customers are like, what is this thing? And so I think telling that whole story of the many months that that thing grows and how and why, and then including a recipe can make it seem, especially a less familiar crop, make it seem like a little bit more of like a treasure than just like a thing that they've never seen before. Yep. And it can also be a way of sort of in doing some of the specific farming practices, like talk about like, oh, we to grow this tomato, we like do this trellising and we harvest them every week and we worry about these diseases or that kind of stuff. So we have about 10 minutes. Does anybody have questions or ideas or like things that they are like, oh, we do this and it has been really fun, or I love to write an article that sounds more like this? Well, as always, this video will be shared on our YouTube along with the other videos from these workshops. There are 2 workshops remaining. One is, we're not doing one next week, but the following week is event management and planning. And on December 4th, we're going to talk about evaluation and surveys. So we'd love to have you attend for any of those. Also, feel free to check out those past workshops. Yeah, so thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to chat with you about this topic today. And yeah, I hope to see you at another workshop.